I wish it was, but I have zero confidence that this president is going to do anything meaningful to help Ukraine. Perhaps the reason that they have not commented, I don't know this, but they're trying to figure out what would they say. I mean, because this has proved that Ukraine is not going anywhere, that they're not going to collapse, that their defeat is not inevitable, and that Russia is, in fact, very vulnerable. And so, I saw several comments from people like Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn and I think Alex Jones and others who are MAGA, have been, pro-Kremlin all along, that are connected to the administration, at least unofficially. And they came out saying this was outrageous, that, they're trying to destroy Trump's dream of a peaceful outcome and all this nonsense. But I haven't seen anything from the administration. Now, of course, the U.S. got rid of, or the administration got rid of National Security Advisor Waltz. So Secretary Rubio has National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. They have not filled all the positions in the administration, including in the Department of Defense. So I think that they don't have enough people in place to do what needs to be done and to do the analysis and to think about it. And they've got knuckleheads that are the spokeswoman for the Department of Defense. It's terrible. And she's absolutely a Kremlin versteher, supporter. So they probably are trying to figure out what the hell to say. And I think even some European countries also are not sure what to say, because they were so surprised by this.
From your perspective, should U.S. President Trump be ashamed of his comments that Ukraine doesn't have the cards, at least after this attack on Russia?
Yes, of course he should, but he has no shame. I think that the approach of the Trump administration from the beginning has been doomed to failure. They never understood the culture, the geography, the history, why Ukraine was fighting. They never could even say that Russia was the aggressor. They wanted Ukraine to give up land from the very beginning. I don't think that they actually care about Ukraine per se, and sovereignty and these kind of things. So, and then they put people that are incompetent, like Mr. Witkoff and General Kellogg, in charge of the negotiation. So, should they be ashamed? Of course. But the problem is that, they're on the wrong side of this conflict. It's not in the best interest of America. So, most of the Congress supports Ukraine, even the Republican members of this administration. I think because they're not motivated by moral principles, I think they don't know what to do on this.
Also, according to the Wall Street Journal, Trump's administration is considering to impose sanctions against Russia. Do you have any kind of expectations that this decision would be made by Trump and his team?
Well, of course they should. And he's been talking about it for months. He said 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks, 2 more, and they never do it. I don't know what they're waiting on. So I think that I have to say, unfortunately, and for me it's embarrassing, that I have no confidence that this administration is actually going to do it. Now, the Senate has put together a very, very strong sanctions package. And I saw today that the Speaker of the House, Mr. Johnson, says that many members of the Congress support it also. So what are they waiting on? I mean, they have enough that they could do it without the president, but I think that the Republican leadership would prefer to have the president, give the go-ahead to do this. And maybe he will. I mean, I'll be very happy to say that I was wrong if he does come out and say that they're going to do it. And you would think he would, because the Russians have mocked him. They've shown they have zero respect for this administration. So I don't know why he is not using all the leverage that he has.
Also, Ukraine has participated in another round of negotiations with the Russian team in Istanbul. However, Russia demanded unrealistic concessions from Ukraine. According to their so-called memorandum, they demanded full withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from its own 4 regions and also other unrealistic concessions from Ukraine. Do these negotiations have any kind of sense?
I have to say I'm impressed with the patience and the tolerance of the Ukrainian side to put up with this vulgar nonsense and these demands. I don't think anybody in Ukraine is surprised by the Russian approach. But I have confidence that the Ukrainian government knows how to do this, and if it's worthwhile to keep sending a team there to keep the door open or whatever, or to make sure that nobody in Europe or the United States would say that Ukraine is not interested in negotiation. But that the maximalist position the Russians came in on Monday, not a surprise. I suspect if it helps Ukraine get back any children and any wounded prisoners, maybe that's worthwhile.
Let's cover also Russia's war aims. According to Bloomberg, Vladimir Putin is confident that his army will be able to break through Ukrainian defense lines and capture the whole 4 regions of Ukraine until the end of this year, according to Bloomberg's sources close to Kremlin. Do you believe in that, and what are their chances to do so?
Yeah, I don't see that as a likely outcome. Of course, it's possible, and because Russia is willing to just keep feeding people into the fight, and they don't care about their own casualties, it's conceivable that they could keep trying to overwhelm Ukrainian defenders. But I don't see that happening. Assuming that Ukraine is able to continue to grow its own defense industry, and assuming that other countries continue to provide some support to Ukraine, even without the United States, then I think that it's hard to imagine a breakthrough. I mean, Russia does not have, as far as I can tell, they don't have the mobile forces, the capability that can do that. And because of the overwhelming numbers of drones that are out there, it's very difficult for anybody to move within 20 kilometers of the front line. So you'd have difficulty massing a force, even if you had it, to be able to break through and go somewhere. So it seems to me that what we're seeing now is what we're going to see for the rest of the year, unless something dramatic happens from the outside.
And also, do you believe that they can cross the Nippro River? Because Putin seems to believe in that. If you want to take the city of Kherson, you have to cross this maritime obstacles at Nippro River. What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, I think the Russians have shown they do not have the capability to conduct an effective river crossing. Every time they've tried, they've been crushed. So I almost hope they try again, because the Ukrainians know exactly where they would come. They would be very vulnerable to any kind of drones. I mean, I just don't see it happening. At least not in the traditional sense. I mean, maybe there's a way to do certain things, and I'm not prepared to say that the Russians are too dumb to do it. I just don't see them having the capability to be able to do that. It's hard to imagine that.
Also, Vladimir Putin has ordered to create so-called buffer zone along the border with Ukraine. Russians have launched offensive inside the Sumy region. However, they have been halted. This offensive has been halted by the Ukrainian armed forces. What is your assessment of this battle inside the Sumy region of Ukraine?
If as the lines become stabilized, then I think it just becomes, as Ukraine continues to develop more and more long-range capabilities, you you start hitting Russian headquarters, you hit Russian logistics, you hit Russian artillery and rocket launchers. So this so-called buffer zone will be a shell, will be hollow if the Ukrainians are able to destroy those kinds of targets. That's how you neutralize Russia's only advantage of mass. Plus, I think that Ukrainian special forces and Ukrainian intelligence are just operating at a different level than what the Russians are able to do. I mean, they're like, different capability, innovation, and Russia, from the beginning, has proved to me that they cannot defend themselves. I mean, this whole the Kursk operation last year, Ukraine crossed that border with no problem. What Ukraine has done going after Russian oil and gas infrastructure, the Russian general that was killed out in the outskirts of Moscow a couple of months ago by an exploding e-scooter. I mean, this is an amazing level of penetration that's as good as or better than what the Mossad did with the famous pager attack on the Hezbollah. I mean, Ukraine is, that's where the Ukrainians are.
And do you feel that Ukraine would be able to turn the tide in this war in the nearest future?
As much as I want that, I don't see that happening unless there is some significant change externally, whether that's in the form of delivery of significant amounts of new capabilities, or real economic pressure on Russia. The stopping of the so-called shadow fleet vessels coming out of the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, and more destruction of the Russian oil and gas infrastructure, so that they can no longer make the money that they need from sales to India and China. I mean, that would be real pressure. But it's going to take something like those two things: real significant quantity and quality of external support, and real economic pressure will be what turns the tide finally, I think. Now, of course, nobody knows exactly what's going on inside Russia. I mean, it's not a transparent society. I would never rule out the possibility of something happening inside the regime. We'll see. But I'm not assuming that's going to happen anytime soon.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Heroam Slava. Thank you, Daniel.
You just mentioned about the position of US President Donald Trump. Trump has not yet commented on these attacks of Ukraine deep inside Russia. However, we know that he has been saying that Ukraine, quote, doesn't have the cards. Don't you think that now this is a moment when he could realize that President Zelensky and Ukraine do have the cards to actually have an upper hand in this war, to prevail in this conflict?
Yes, I think absolutely. Even Trump cannot dismiss this as anything but a huge strategic success for Ukraine. Now, it is clear that President Trump does not necessarily go into the detail of these things and doesn't understand it. It's pretty clear as well that Ukraine's military operational security, as we call it, has been absolutely excellent. Obviously the Russians had no idea this was happening, and it seems pretty clear the Americans didn't either. So it is a demonstration, I think, very clearly to President Trump and the Americans that Ukraine does have the ability. Ukraine can move forward and can defeat and push the Russians out of Ukraine, if they are given all the resources that they need to do it. So let's hope that President Trump is clever enough to realize this and clever enough to know which is the side to back, and obviously gives Ukraine all the support they need in order to prevail, in order to get the Russians to the ceasefire table, to get a just ceasefire and peace for the Ukrainian people.
Do you feel that this Ukrainian attacks deep inside Russia also bring US President Donald Trump closer to imposing sanctions against Russian economy?
Well, let us hope so, because Trump alone has the ability to really turn the screw on the Russian economy, and sanctions, particularly against the oil industry. If Russia cannot sell its oil, number one, and if it can't sell its oil above $50 a barrel, its economy is going to grind to a halt pretty quickly, and its war machine is going to grind to a halt pretty quickly. This is all within the gift of President Trump. And let's hope that he now realizes that that's the case and does the right thing.
Let's cover also recent developments inside Russia. Zaur Gartsi, a retired Russian army major who was in charge of capturing the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, was killed in an explosion in Russia last week. He died as a result of explosion of a suicide bomber who was also serving in Russian police. What could this mean?
Well, it's very difficult to say without the full details. But again, this does seem like another key Russian military figure who has been assassinated, killed, however way you want to dress it up. It is strange that it's a suicide bomber that's done it. That it would suggest that it is more a disgruntled Russian than perhaps something sponsored by the Ukraine Secret Service. But yet again, it puts another nail in the Russian coffin that none of its key commanders are safe. Those who have committed atrocities against Ukraine people, again, get their just desserts, whatever ways. And if this happens to be a Russian soldier who's done it, then that, I think, indicates quite how desperate morale is within the Russian army, and leads me to really agree what I said to you last time we spoke, that I think the Russian army is reaching its culminating point. It's running out of steam, which is why it's so important that we in the West give everything we can to Ukraine to make sure that they can push the Russians over the line to come and discuss a proper and just peace deal with the Ukrainian negotiators.
It is also interesting that this suicide bomber was serving in Russian police. Could this indicate another unpleasant moments in the Russian society, this dissatisfaction of Russian regime, and could this also fuel another, for example, coup in Russia, so-called Prigozhin-style march in Moscow, or any other conflict inside regime?
Well, I think it's probably too early to say on this particular thing, but it is certainly the case, and the rumors are getting stronger and stronger, that there's a lot of discontent within the Russian military, the Russian police, and the rank and file Russian civilians who are suffering a heck of a lot more than Putin and his henchmen. And if this activity continues, then the rumors will continue as well. So I think Putin this week is in a very precarious position, in fact, more precarious than he's been for the last 3 years. And let's hope he realizes that. And as far as Ukraine and the West is concerned, he can get out of this by negotiating a just peace plan with the Ukrainian government.
You just mentioned about the Putin's way out of this war. It seems like Vladimir Putin faces stalemate situation. He's in difficult situation because, on one hand, if he continues the war against Ukraine, then there would be another attack deep inside Russia on Russian strategic assets and on Russian key military facilities. On the other hand, if he agrees with ceasefire proposals, then Russian hardliners could topple his regime. Do you feel that Vladimir Putin has this chance to have a way out of this difficult situation? Only he is responsible for this, where he is right now.
Well, as you say, it is a complex and difficult situation, and Putin has brought it on himself. It's, for normal democratic peoples like Ukraine and Britain, it would seem straightforward. He would negotiate a ceasefire, and that would be it. However, this is Russia, and he is a dictator who no doubt has created enemies, and he has created a disaster for Russia. So he probably expects that if he goes for a ceasefire now, then many of those hardliners close to him will see him as a failure and that he's capitulated and will remove him. So we're in a really tense time at the moment, but it's key that Ukraine and its Western allies show a very committed and unified position to force the Russians to the negotiation table. And I'm sure, as far as we're concerned, if Putin keeps going or not is of no concern. What is important is the war ends as soon as possible and creates a just peace for Ukraine.
Also, according to Bloomberg, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is confident that his army would be able to break through Ukrainian defense lines and capture whole 4 Ukrainian regions until the end of this year. What is your assessment of this unrealistic objective of Putin's war machine?
Well, I think it is unrealistic. The lines on the contact line, 800 meters or so long, have moved very, very little in the last year. In fact, last 18 months, the only major incursion was by Ukraine forces in the Kursk region back last summer. So, yeah, I don't think there is any prospect that Russian ground forces are going to make any great gains into Ukraine. And let's hope that the Russians realize that, because, this ridiculous war is just killing more and more people every day. And everybody in the world seems to want peace except Putin and his close advisors. Let's hope that the majority of the Russians realize this, and we can get a ceasefire and peace deal, as soon as possible to prevent the killing and try and enable Ukraine to get back on its feet. And let's not forget, everybody mustn't forget, that it's Russia that was the aggressor. Russia invaded Ukraine, and it needs to get out, and it then needs to pay recompense for all the damage that's been done.
Let's also cover UK nuclear deterrence and the new news developments regarding the UK's defense. According to the British media, UK fighter jets could soon carry nuclear bombs, tactical nuclear weapons, for the first time of the history. What is your reaction, your assessment of this new defense plans of the UK government regarding the usage of tactical nuclear weapons, as you just proposed in your recent articles?
Well, I think this comes out of the UK Strategic Defence Review, which was announced yesterday. I personally think it is absolutely the right move. When Putin looks at Europe and looks at the nuclear deterrent, he doesn't see a lot of tactical nuclear weapons, and certainly Britain has got no tactical nuclear weapons. Putin assumes that if he used a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine, Britain is not going to start Armageddon, if you like, start a global nuclear war by firing a nuclear ballistic missile. And he's probably right. But Britain gave up its tactical nuclear weapons bizarrely in 1997, the same year that Ukraine signed the Budapest Treaty, which Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in return for assurance of security from the Russians, the Americans, and the Brits. So I think this is a really good move, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later.
Also, British government plans to build another 12 submarines in response to the rising threats around the globe, and also in response to the threats posed by Russia. What is your take on such plans of British government, and do you expect these plans to be implemented soon?
It's a key part of the UK's Strategic Defence Review. I think it makes a lot of sense. These nuclear submarines hold Britain's cruise missiles and hypersonic missiles. These have proved to be very effective in the Ukraine war. So it makes a lot of sense. The challenge with Britain's new defence review is that a lot of these capabilities, are not going to be in position for 10 years or so. And actually, what we need is capability now, so that it's a deterrence now against Putin, because that's really what the UK defence restructuring is all focusing on. So the kit is absolutely as it should be. Whether the British government is prepared to spend the money on it, that is another issue. But I think most people have welcomed, certainly in the UK, the defence review, which was announced yesterday.
And also the last question for you regarding the military industrial base of the United Kingdom. UK Defence Minister announced the new investment in the increasing production of military equipment in the UK. 1.5 billion pounds would be invested in this area to increase production of weaponry in the United Kingdom. What is your assessment of this? Another step to make the United Kingdom more safe place to live and to deter Russia from another attack against European state?
I think this is another sensible move by the British government. Another lesson being learned from Ukraine, that you need to be able to produce domestically enough ammunition and missiles of yourself in order to maintain conflict against somebody like Russia. And, if the Russians look and see that Britain has all this capability, then it provides extra deterrence. So, and also the government will say it's good for British prosperity and to grow the British economy. British defence industry is a very major part of the British economy. So, again, I think this is a good thing and to be applauded.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for having me, Daniel, and glory to Ukraine.